Please excuse all typos. I always procrastinate when you're doing these things, and I think this talk has been my closest call so far. All right. Is this, this works? This works? All right. Okay, good morning. Thank you to the NDF planning team for the invitation, and to Te Papa for hosting us in this amazing space. Special thanks to Matariki, Fiona, and Raywin for helping me to coordinate plans to include my family on this trip. We've had an amazing time so far. It's a beautiful country, and we've been all over, and looking forward to coming back. This morning, I'd like to spend some time talking about the Documenting the Now project, which is based in the US. I'm going to introduce you to some work we've been doing on the project around ethics and archiving the web and social media. And some future work we have planned around archiving social justice activism, especially as social media and the web have become important tools for activists. I'll also talk to you about why we do the work that we do, because it's important to understand what drives some of the non-traditional approaches to addressing some of our issues in the cultural heritage sector. My hope is that our work might inspire you in your own attempts to address documentation around social media and the web. I think there are some good lessons in our experience that folks can learn from. And I also hope that you might join the community of people we're bringing together for collaborative work on these topics. We've already had a great start on that front with the joint Documenting the Now workshop that we held last week with the National Library and Te Papa. So thank you to Jessica Moran and Matariki again for their help there. So before we get too deep into the weeds, I'd like to share a bit about my current professional home. I think the commitment our places of employment put towards supporting our work can determine our level of success more than anything else. As we pursue solutions to challenges in the cultural heritage sector that are more aligned with social justice ideals. I recently started working as the Director of Equity Initiatives for SHIFT, a nonprofit organization that develops products, services, and programs that support social change. More specifically, I work with the US-based team, so shout out to John, Haley, and Lynette. Our team in the US is small but mighty. So where we work matters, and as you know, none of the work that we do is neutral. So at SHIFT, we proudly do work that is on the side of uplifting the lives and histories of marginalized and oppressed people. In their 2015 article, Ferguson is Everywhere, Initiators in Emergent Counter-Public Networks, Sarah Jackson and Brooke Wells investigate the impact of early initiators on online dissent by looking at how Michael Brown's neighbors used social media to control the early narratives about his death in Ferguson, Missouri in August 2014. The article makes a compelling case for the power of social media as a vital tool for communication for marginalized people to tell stories from their own perspectives, especially in the early stages of an event, before the larger media entities and what Jackson and Wells called the elite begin sharing about the event as well. In their article, they demonstrate how local people in Ferguson, Missouri were able to get their tweets amplified by the mainstream media outlets, therefore controlling the early stories about Brown, before they eventually lost control of the narrative as the event grew more popular. The authors write, quote, African Americans, women, and young people, including several members of Michael Brown's working class African American community, were particularly influential and succeeded in defining the terms of the debate despite their historical exclusion from the American public sphere, end quote. Recognizing the power of these social media platforms to grow social movements, and also as an avenue to document cultural moments, are some of the same reasons that Ed Summers and I started doing work on what would eventually lead to the creation of the Documenting the Now project. The Documenting the Now project, which is currently a collaborative effort between the University of Maryland, SHIFT, and the University of Virginia, began during the protests sparked in the aftermath of the murder of Michael Brown, an African-American teenager, in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9th, 2014. That week, several archivists were attending our national conference in Washington, D.C., and like many who remember the first week of the Ferguson uprising, we were glued to Twitter, the live streams, and television, watching the events unfold there in real time. Many of us had the feeling that something was different about this particular moment, and it could turn into something much bigger. So naturally, as archivists, we started thinking about how we might be able to document the event. While protests over the police killings of unarmed African Americans were not new, this one was different in that it was the first time it fully played out in the era of social media. Even from the very moment the incident happened, when a neighbor of Michael Brown's posted a picture of his lifeless body laying in the street as his killer, a police officer named Darren Wilson, stood over him. It was also the first time we got to instantly witness millions of thoughts and feelings from the public about a police murder incident like this in the United States. Beginning with Michael Brown's neighbors, friends, and family, it was also the first time an incident of police violence against an African American that we were also able to engage in the sharing, right, in real time, and to participate collectively in the historical moment. Those personal narratives turned out to be extremely important for shaping the early story from the community's perspective before the mainstream media entities descended onto Ferguson. Now, of course, we know that the Arab Spring in 2010 was the first time social media was used on a mass scale as a vehicle to drive activism on an international issue, but we had not seen this in the United States until Ferguson. And then later with the murders of several other people by police, on camera, and eventually leading up to the massive growth of the Black Lives Matter hashtag and movement. As archivists, we thought Ferguson was a key moment to document the narratives of voices that usually are left out of our collective histories. But we were quickly called out, and rightly so, by some people who also saw this moment as an opportunity for exploitation by archives and the academic community. Critiques of our early approach to documenting Ferguson questioned whether we had sought consent to collect individual social media content. They questioned if we were applying care to attempting to archive trauma around the lives of marginalized people. They also included critiques about our work, about our lack of personal engagement with the communities we were attempting to document from afar. Those were all fair criticisms of our early work within the first few months, and they influenced how we moved forward with the project later on when we received grant funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to continue our work a year later. The Documenting the Now project is committed to building accessible tools and helping to develop a community of people interested in the ethical archiving, use, and long-term preservation of social media content. A lot of our work is around how to document social justice activism and the experiences of oppressed people, partly because the harms activists and people of color face when participating online. But we're generally interested in all the ways documentation can happen online. So I'll talk more today about our attempts to document social justice activism, because the web and social media have become such important tools in the activist toolkit. And that has happened. And as that has happened, we think it's vital that archivists and other culture documenters operate in that space as well. But on the Documenting Now project, we're not content with only archiving the web from afar with software. We're interested in engaging with activists and other groups using social media as part of their work in an effort to document their activities in ways that don't cause further harm to them and that truly reflect their perspectives. So, why is the Documenting the Now project interested in archiving social justice activism? Well, for two main reasons. First, social justice activists are some of the most important conduits to understanding the issues affecting marginalized and oppressed people, and particularly on the local level. Activists are often some of the most knowledgeable people about the issues, and in most cases already have the trust of the community because they are part of the community. The Documenting the Now project is interested in exploring how social justice activists can help us better document histories of marginalized people by building community-based digital archives from their perspectives. Whether it's environmental racism, healthcare access, education policy, mass incarceration, immigrants' rights, or ending police violence, activists are often at the forefront of advocating for people and communities, educating the public, and proposing solutions to address the issues. Social justice activists are closest to the issues and the people most affected by them, and they present some of the most effective solutions. We've seen countless examples of this from activists in the United States in the past few years, fighting for causes, from Ferguson to Black Lives Matter. There are activists in St. Louis, Missouri, like Kayla Reed and her Action St. Louis organization, fighting against police violence and advocating for African American political participation and voting rights. Activist and educator and healthcare professional Brittany Farrell, advocating for Black women's health issues, such as birthing justice. There's the Black Youth Project, with chapters in several cities in the United States focusing on social justice issues for all Black people and doing their work from a feminist queer perspective. On the national level, there's the Black Lives Matter organization with chapters in several US cities, founded by Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. They fight against police violence, for police accountability, and for immigrants' rights, among other issues. Then we have Malkia Cyril and the Center for Media Justice, a media action and grassroots network working on surveillance justice issues such as digital prisons and digital security for activists and communities of color. We've also seen the successes and the struggles of water rights activists over the past several years. People like Madonna Thunderhawk, with her long history of fighting for American Indian rights as a member of the American Indian movement, and more recently as a grandmother to indigenous water rights activists from Standing Rock, fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline. There are, of course, thousands of these examples of activists doing the work, and this list could certainly go on for a while, but I think you get the point. Activists are committed to helping solve a wide range of issues affecting the lives of marginalized and oppressed people. So what can we learn from them that can help us better document the experiences of those traditionally left out of our historical record? What would our archives look like if we worked hand in hand with these groups to build archives around the issues they were concerned about? What would it look like to document the histories of oppressed and marginalized people from the perspectives of those who are literally trying to save their lives? The second reason Documenting the Now is interested in archiving social justice activism is because activists, and especially Black and brown activists, along with the communities they fight for, are increasingly using the web and social media to do their work. They understand the power of the platforms to amplify their causes. According to a recent Pew Research Center study, 69% of Americans feel social media platforms are important in getting politicians to pay attention, and 67% feel platforms are important for creating sustained movements for social change. In 2016, to mark the 10-year anniversary of the founding of Twitter, the social media platform published a list of its top 10 most used hashtags in its 10-year history. Ferguson was number 1, and Black Lives Matter was number 3 on that list. At the time of the anniversary, the Ferguson hashtag had been used over 27 million times. According to another Pew Research Center study of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Lives Matter hashtag, which first appeared in July 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin, researchers highlight evidence of social media as an increasingly important organizing tool for activists. The study says, quote, organizers of Black Lives Matter made social media, and specifically the hashtag Black Lives Matter, a centerpiece of their strategy. As a result, the growth of the movement offline was directly linked with the online conversation, end quote. The strategic use of social media by social justice activists was also highlighted in the groundbreaking study Beyond the Hashtags, Ferguson, Black Lives Matter, and the Online Struggle for Offline Justice by Dean Freelon, Meredith Clark, and Charlton McIlwain. Among several other key points, the authors found that social media posts by activists were essential in spreading Michael Brown's story nationally, and that protesters and their supporters were generally able to circulate their own narratives on Twitter without relying on mainstream news outlets. Clearly, activists and the general public, especially people of color and other oppressed groups, recognize the power of the medium to share their stories, and this presents tremendous opportunities for documenting the histories of these groups. Now, of course, activists are already building their own archives and have always tried to document their work. So what we are proposing is not necessarily new. Some of these archives may not look like what we traditionally call archives, but activists have always documented their efforts. What we want to do is contribute to this space and hopefully offer some strategies and resources that people can use to continue documenting their work, especially as social media, the web, and digital participation has become such important tools, such important parts of their work. There have also been several documentation projects led by archivists and academics around social justice activism. We're also not new in this space, right? There are digital archives about Occupy Wall Street, community-based archives documenting social justice movements like the Interference Archive in New York and the Southern California Library in South Central. And university-based efforts to document activism on campus, such as Project Stand, led by my friend and collaborator, Lael Hughes-Watkins. They are all great examples of documentation projects around activism. The Colored Conventions Project is another one I draw inspiration from, and which deserves a lot of recognition as it looks at documenting early history of African American activism. And this quote is from their website. Quote, "From 1830 until the 1890s, already free and once captive, Black people came together in state and national political meetings called colored conventions. Before the war, they strategized about how to achieve educational, labor, and legal justice at a moment when Black rights were constricting nationally and locally. After the war, the numbers swelled as they continued to mobilize to ensure that Black citizenship rights and safety, Black labor rights and land, Black education and institutions would be protected under the law. ColoredConventions.org endeavors to transform teaching and learning about the historic collective organizing effort and about the many leaders and places involved in it, bringing them to digital life for a new generation of students and scholars across disciplines, and for community researchers interested in the history of the activist church, civil rights, educational, and entrepreneurial engagement," end quote. I highlight these projects because it's important to acknowledge where good work has been done and continues to happen, and we continue to learn from these efforts. So, activists are always weighing the balance between the positive impacts of using new technology, such as the web and social media, versus the potential harms they may face, right, by participating in these spaces to do their work. And we try to give voice to these issues on the Documenting the Now project as well. We work hard to create opportunities for other archivists and culture documenters to listen to activists about how they navigate social media and the web. Excuse me. In March of this year, the Documenting the Now project, in partnership with Rhizome and the Web Recorder Project, hosted a national forum on ethics and archiving the web in New York City. As part of the event, we invited activists, archivists, scholars, librarians, journalists, and people from several other sectors to join us for conversations around our practices for documenting historical and cultural events represented on the web. Our closing panel featured Madonna Thunderhawk, her daughter Marcella Gilbert, and filmmaker Elizabeth Castle, talking about several topics, including Madonna's long history of activism and the use of social media during the water protests at Standing Rock. I'm going to show a short clip of Madonna talking about the use of social media during the protests, and I prefer to show clips of activists speaking because I think it's important to hear them in their own voice as they talk about these issues. Madonna is a member of the Ohenumpa band of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe and is a co-founder of Women of All Red Nations, WARN. She was a member of the American Indian movement that occupied Alcatraz and Wounded Knee in protest of the federal government's genocidal policies against Native Americans. She spent months camped at Standing Rock to oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline and to protect clean water and treaty rights. She also works as a tribal liaison with the Lakota People's Law Project, helping to build alliances and support for Indian child welfare among South Dakota's tribal leaders and communities. And that was a quote from her bio. So let's go ahead and show the short video now, and then we'll pick it up after.
Do you know if the video has captions in it?
It doesn't, sorry. Ancestors were thinking 7 generations ahead. So we know all this. So we know where we stand and what it takes to survive. So if here comes a social media for this modern day organizing, it's totally amazing. I mean, even so much as everybody came. There was a representatives from every indigenous community on this planet sent a delegation. All those flags you saw there were all flags of all the different organizations and official tribal governments in the United States came and they brought their flag because they wanted everybody to know that they were there in support. So that was the flag, that was kind of like the flag roll, and it just kept getting longer and bigger as the days went by, the weeks went by. So the thing that social media did was brought everybody there. And it was mainly a camp of indigenous people. Up until Trump got elected. And practically overnight, because of social media, overnight we had a flood of young people that came from all over this country, non-native, non-indigenous. So that's what social media did, for the whole concept of Mini Wichoni in our language means water is life. And every morning you could hear the whole camp, which was probably half, when the blizzards hit, half non-native. And you could hear every morning echoing, Mini Wichoni, Mini Wichoni. They learned that phrase and they knew what it meant. So, yeah, we knew, but also our camp was set up on the only hill in the camp, and it was called Facebook Hill. Because everybody was up there with their phones, like this. So that's where we were camped, so as elders, we could oversee, the camp. And we had our family taking turns, and coming and going to take care of us, the elders. And we were camped right next to the legal tent. We had a legal tent. And people, as soon as you came, they sent them up there to the legal tent. They took down all your information that you wanted to have down there. They wrote the number of the legal team on your arm in case you got busted, you got taken. And then on the other side of that was a media tent. And there was how many?
2,000
2,000
as of November.
That had media cards that came in registered. And they were all mostly, the social media. We didn't have any, Al Jazeera came, I think. The other large media networks or whatever, they came after in December when the the veterans all came, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of veterans that came to support. Then all of a sudden the media shows up in their big vans and everything, you know. But it was the social media that spread the word for us. But we went in with that knowing that we were being monitored. We've always been monitored. That's nothing new for us. But that's the only media we had to use. For example, we'd go catch a ride or somebody would come and get us and take us up to the 10 miles away was the big casino and motel. And, you know, you find out who's got who's there that you know that has a room that will let you use the shower. You know, so we'd go and sometimes somebody would get us a room for the night, the elders. Oh, this is for the elders, you know, so we'd go and stay. But, you know, we'd always, the reception wasn't that good. But you could, you know, sometimes we'd say, oh man, look, what's going on at the camp? Oh, we got to get back, you know, because we'd see it on Facebook 10 miles away, you know. So we'd have to hustle and get back there, you know. And then we had a, am I talking too long on this? Got another question? Is this all right? Am I rambling on? You know, old guys do that sometimes. We ramble on. But then again, I'm forgetful. So when something comes, I got to say it. Otherwise, I forget. You know? But one of the things I thought that was key is the surveillance. We had a helicopter and a small airplane that every day and night was circling. You know, and sometimes everybody's phone would go dead or something. You know, we'd say, that's Tiger Swan doing that. You know, Tiger Swan mercenaries that the county hired to you know, they were the ones that were all in their military gear and their military everything that they brought. That was Tiger Swan. Oh, we knew that. But what we also found out.
Thank you. All right. So clearly, activists see the value of social media. And, you know, I'm sorry that clip was a little long, but, you know, that was a really inspiring moment at the conference to listen to this legendary activist talk about how she was using Facebook, right? Her and the other grandmothers at the camp and everyone else at the camp were using Facebook to raise awareness of that movement. So that was really inspiring, and I thought it was important you hear that in their own words. In her own words. So clearly, activists see the value of social media, and in this case, the role Facebook played in bringing people together to fight for social justice. It was really interesting to hear her talk about how Facebook brought young people to Standing Rock. But you can also hear her acknowledge their awareness of how the platforms were being used for surveillance in that same clip, right? In it, she mentions the private security firm called Tiger Swan, and their efforts to document protest activity on behalf of the local police department. That security firm was the focus of several reports, and this is a sort of cover page from a Tiger Swan, what you call it, like situational report that they would deliver these reports to the police department every day. And so this is the camp. This is a picture of the camp, and I guess they're the gorilla in the clouds sort of looking down onto the camp. And, you know, that was just an amazing picture, but so sort of representative of what they were doing there, right? Monitoring folks with the intent to harm. So that security firm was the focus of several reports by the Intercept news magazine in 2017. The reports were supported by hundreds of leaked documents from a former Tiger Swan contractor that revealed much more detail about what Madonna mentioned in her talk. And I encourage you to check out the Intercept reporting on this to get a better understanding of how police and private law enforcement use social media, the web, and other digital tools to monitor protests. So this is, again, part of their intelligence reports where they're talking about which Twitter feeds that they're monitoring, right? So they're monitoring the NoDAPL hashtag and the DAPL hashtag. They're obviously looking at the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Facebook page. and other Facebook pages. So clearly, social media is a key part of their strategy of surveillance. Another part of the reporting that came out is when this Tiger Swan company sort of figured out a way to look at private messages within Facebook from folks, and this is how they're detailing to the police department how they do that, right? So I think sometimes we hear that police are monitoring social media of protesters, but we rarely get to see how that happens. And these leaked documents in the Intercept piece were really revealing about how how they did their work. I think it's maybe a 7 or 8 part sort of series on the Intercept about this effort. It's called Oil and Water. Of course, police surveillance of activists of color has a long history, and Tiger Swan is not the only new player. The FBI started the counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO, that targeted civil rights activists in the 1960s and 1970s, and more recently we saw police openly talk about prosecuting protesters from Ferguson to Baltimore based on social media evidence. The fact is, police are finding new ways to aid their investigations through social media. An article published in September 2017 in Social Media and Society referenced a survey from the International Association of Police Chiefs that showed that over 96% of police departments use social media for messaging and social media monitoring tools for evidence gathering. And while it is understandable that police might use social media and monitoring tools to gather evidence of real crimes, such as maybe investigating cyber stalking or threats of violence online, we know that the marriage of racism and policing in the United States inevitably means that people of color will be disproportionately targeted with these tools. In a recent paper titled "Stop and Frisk: Online, Theorizing Everyday Racism in Digital Policing in the Use of Social Media for Identification of Criminal Conduct and Associations," the authors document new ways police are using social media to gather evidence and the potential implications this may have for communities of color. They write, and I quote, using events surrounding the fatal police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 as a trigger, the Department of Homeland Security has been collecting information from social media sites in what it terms as an effort to provide situational awareness to law enforcement agencies. When paired with the problematic constructions of race in the United States, these actions and legislations erode the personal security of people of color. It's even more troubling when you read this 2016 article, again from The Intercept, about how the Central Intelligence Agency, right, the CIA, uses venture capital to invest in social media monitoring companies they hope will build better monitoring tools for law enforcement that could help support their criminal investigations. One of those companies, Geophedia, seemed to be particularly popular with law enforcement agencies because of their generous free trials of the software, trainings, and webinars, and their claims that they could predict and monitor threats around protests. The ACLU in California broke a story in 2016 that showed how several police departments across the country were using Geophedia's monitoring tools in secret to monitor protests, and they were using them in secret partly because they had not sought approval from local government agencies where permission for purchasing surveillance tools was usually sought first. In the ACLU story, they write, the racist implications of social media surveillance technology are not surprising. We know that when law enforcement gets to conceal the use of surveillance technology, they also get to conceal its misuse. Discriminatory policing that targets communities of color is unacceptable, and secretive, sophisticated surveillance technologies supersize the impact of racial profiling and abuse. The ACLU report also highlighted evidence that Geophedia's popularity with police departments was due in part to the marketing of their tools as the best for monitoring protests. And this is an image of a marketing email they sent to a police department, and it reads, I don't know if you could read that up there. We've added new content to our collection containing social media posts from the scene of the protests in Ferguson, Missouri. Click below to see the collection now. And I like showing this this clip because it kind of looks like something we would do in library land, as we design our sort of digital collection spaces, right? It's got the image, it's got some metadata describing the image. It's very easy to sort of get in there and see what's going on, right? So maybe they learned something from us, which is kind of scary. So what does this surveillance mean for activists in real life? This is a screenshot from a surveillance report generated for the Baltimore Police Department during the protest after the murder of Freddie Gray in 2015, I believe, or 2016. DeRay McKesson and Jonetta Elzie were prominent activists throughout the Ferguson protests, right, a year before. And they've since become national figures advocating against police violence. And here they are, labeled as threat actors, right, by a security company that offers social media mining as one of its services to police departments, right? So these are people who participate in nonviolent protests, were well known nationally by this point. And here is a company, Zero Fox, calling them threats, basically almost labeling them as terrorists, right? People who just showed up to show support in a local community. So what does this mean, when police departments see these images and these reports? How does that impact how they react to these people on the ground during a protest, right? And this quote really sums it up. It's from a Geophedia case study. They would do these case studies for the police departments that they would then deliver to help share as part of their marketing about their work with the Baltimore Police Department, right? We plan to use social media archive data from Geophedia to prosecute as many lawbreakers from the riots as we can. So it's clear what they're doing, right? Their intentions. So I share all these because it's important we understand how activists can be harmed online if we're going to attempt to work with them to document historical events. As activists increasingly use social media and the web as part of their work, the chances that the police and other entities are monitoring their activities also grows, increasing the chances that they can be prosecuted or have their reputations harmed in several ways. As archivists interested in documenting the work of these groups and the communities they come from, we don't want to replicate that behavior of the surveillance state, right? But how do we get to these stories and the people and their content in ways that are not exploitative? In addition to building social media collection tools like DocNow and like the DocNow application, and developing ethical social media data sharing labels like Social Humans, both of which I can talk more about during the panel or in a question and answer session after this if we have time. Another way is to work directly with activists on the ground and in their communities to capture their perspectives by building archives in partnership with them. And this is some of the work I am most excited about with the next phase of our project, which was recently awarded a new round of funding from the Mellon Foundation. I'm also excited about this component of the work because it's what activists asked us to do. They recommended that we show up and not only document movements from afar on the web. They recommended that we record oral histories and talk to people who are not on social media, but nonetheless were instrumental in supporting protests and activism. They also recommended that we document their full lives. We responded by developing the Documenting the Now community-based workshops, which will be an opportunity to put archivists in direct conversation with activist communities through equitable engagement, to learn from those communities, to learn with them, and to share resources that we hope will contribute to a more engaged and ethical documentation strategy around content generated from social justice protests and activism. Through 10 in-person workshops over the next several months, the Documenting the Now project will work with social justice activists to help raise awareness about how their social media content is being collected and the potential harms that might surface because of their social media activities. The community-based workshops will also be an opportunity to train activists in skills and strategies their communities can use to collect, preserve, and share web, social media, and other types of digital content in safe ways. They'll learn to build their own archives of the web, social media, and other digital content as a way to document their activities and to assert more control over their own narratives. The workshops will include components around safely capturing, storing, and retrieving digital content that activists generate during protests, so that content can maybe later authenticated and later used as evidence in court cases or in news stories to correct a narrative, for example. We think there'll also be an opportunity for archivists, right? We'll be inviting archivists to be part of these workshops to learn from activist communities about how they make decisions about using the web, social media, and other digital tools to do their work. And that is vital because archivists and other cultural heritage stewards need to understand how activist communities utilize these tools if they are to better understand how to document content generated from them in ethical ways that don't cause erasure or other forms of harm. So I'm going to end with one more clip. This clip is from a 2-day symposium, and this picture is from all the attendees at the symposium there. This clip is from a 2-day symposium held by the Documenting the Now project in December of 2017 called Digital Blackness in the Archive. Dr. Alea Brown is moderating the panel, and on the panel are activists from Ferguson, Missouri, Brittany Farrell, Alexis Templeton, and Kayla Reed. The event was held at the Ferguson Public Library. And I want to show this clip because, I think it gets to the heart of, why I think I was invited to this conference. It gets to sort of how we listen to activists and how we respond to what they say and how we listen to communities we're trying to document and the opportunities we give them to tell their stories and to tell us how to do the work. So I'll end with the clip.
Just wondering, where is everyone else? Because a movement is not just a collection of individuals with a lot of Twitter followers. That can't be our definition, right? A movement is not just those with a lot of Twitter followers. That cannot be the definition, or the person who's able to get out a tweet quickly. That's not a movement. A movement, stealing from Brittany's, we sit on panels a lot together, the anatomy of a movement actually requires so many different parts that we tend to not honor. We honor the brain, we honor the heart, we don't honor the feet, we don't honor the hands, we don't honor the unseen labor that houses and feeds and transports and babysits and prints papers and designs flyers and opens the door of the building and puts out the chairs, right? Like, all of those things are a part of the movement, and those people's stories never got told before, and we should do a much better job of making sure to figure out how to tell those stories this time.
So many people have viewed Ferguson through a screen, whether that's a mobile device or their desktop or what have you. What have they missed, and are they missing by not actually being here?
I think you missed what we just talked about. I think you missed the humanness, and I think you missed the humanness and the growth. I think you missed the mistakes. I think you missed the failures. I think you missed the successes and how those are celebrated. I think you missed the hard conversations and the conversations that don't get had. I think you missed the fights, the pull up at the Ferguson Library. Then that's a reality, and it's real, and we hide it because we don't want it to look bad, but it is what it is. It's messy. Liberation is messy. If it's a mess to get there, we gonna be a mess getting there. And that's just what it is. It's about unlearning and undoing, and I think that that's missed online because we have to to elevate ourselves to be these perfect people and these perfect leaders and these perfect voices for Black liberation, and it's just not that. We're just, honestly, for lack of a better term, we're some average niggas out here who just who just want some different shit. We want things to look different. We want to be accepted. We want to be able to exist, bruh, you know? And like, we want to be able to talk just like that and it be okay. And I think that's what social media misses. I think they miss they miss people. They miss the interaction, and I think that's super, super important. Because I'm not just a bunch of retweets and favorites. I'm a whole ass human, and Twitter misses that.
All right, thank you.